Heavenly Father who art in heaven, we'd like to say thank you, O Lord, for the breath of life. We'd like to say thank you for waking us this morning, Father. And as we seek to see your face, Lord, we are asking for the strength and the grace that heaven has provided should we ask, that we may attain. May you open up our eyes this morning, O Lord, that we may behold the wonderful things that are within thy law. May your Holy Spirit accompany us in worship, and may you breathe on us the atmosphere of heaven. We love you and we thank you. In Jesus' name we do pray. Amen.
These notes, I'm still addressing some of the issues of the verses in Daniel 11, and there is a argument going in the United Kingdom that what we're suggesting about Daniel 11:11, that the king of the south is Russia, is not correct, and they're teaching that the king of the south is the United States. And a brother from Spain wrote in an email, and it was a very nice observation that when Daniel 11:40-45 was first being preached, the symbol in those verses that was the most hotly debated for the longest time was, who is the glorious land? So now that this is opening up again, here's the same argument in these verses. Who is the United States? Once again, in the beginning, the glorious land was the United States. Once again, we're identifying the United States, and there's an argument coming that no, it isn't the United States. Okay, I don't know exactly how I expressed, one other thing. Another issue that came up that we've mentioned here since I started this class is the railroad depot vision. And I've never been threatened by the railroad depot vision. I think I told that to you at the beginning, because I went in and I've seen the characteristics that are in there and other passages in the Spirit of Prophecies. So I'm not threatened by it. But the railroad depot vision was presented to me from the point of view that it's demonstrating that anything that Future for America or those people that are walking with Future for America do towards organization, but in advance of midnight, is going to be irrelevant anyway, because at midnight the Lord's going to take the work into his own hands, and the railroad depot vision was something that was being used to uphold that claim. So when I presented the part I presented on it, I was emphasizing Miller's rules, if it wasn't clear, and that if you're going to take the two witnesses that we have on the railroad depot vision, both of them are identifying the denominational world. And my argument is that this movement has not been given a name by God. And I went into history and showed that it's God that gives the name to Israel, to the Christian church, Protestant church, and that there's actually, he has to divorce one covenant people before he gives the name to the next covenant people. So my argument is that when the Lord names the church triumphant, it's got to come after the Seventh-day Adventist Church has come to a conclusion, and that would be after midnight. That was my argument. But I also got an email from Canada this morning, which is interesting, and I didn't know this. It wasn't important to me to dig that deep. And now I want you to understand that I understand that Seventh-day Adventists that are in the conservative mold, like most of us in this room are, and really conservative is not a positive word, but I'm just using it to identify a class of Adventists. Most of us are kind of skeptical about, not skeptical, but we have a little bit of skepticism about what someone like the Ellen White estate might say about the history of Adventism, if it seems to be that they're taking the correct political position and possibly covering up some history. I'm going to give you an example of that. Years ago, there was a group in the United Kingdom that was teaching that when the sisters come to church, they have to have a head covering, okay, which I don't want to get into that argument because lots of places have that argument in Adventism, but this particular group we were interacting with And they were presented with some photos of Sister White when she wasn't wearing a head covering. Okay, so that was just a kind of a testimony. If that's what we're supposed to be doing, why wasn't the prophetess doing it? And when confronted with that, their immediate response was, and it's, as far as I know, they've stood on this response all the way through, is, well, someone photoshopped the head covering out of it. And I'm thinking, they had Photoshop back in the 1920s and 30s, okay? But I mean, you could do it manually back then. But my point is, there's this, if the Ellen White estate or whatever says something that doesn't fit our understanding, we sometimes have the ability to be skeptical about what they're saying. Nevertheless, the Railroad Depot vision supposedly took place in 1908, and in the early part of Ellen White's ministry, I know this to be true, they have very few records about where she exactly was as she moved through her ministry travels. But by the time you get into the early 1900s, they have a pretty clear record of where she was day to day. And they can show that there was a period of time in 1908 where she was down in Loma Linda for like 2 weeks, and then there was a couple times, she was living in Elms Haven at that time, there was a couple times in that same year where she came down for just brief periods of time. But if you remember the Railroad Depot vision that we've dealt with, Brother Ross, his premise is that he used to take lots of walks with Ellen White, and it was on one of the walks they ended up the Railroad Depot vision. But the Ellen White estate says in 1908, Sister White wasn't taking any walks anymore. When she was out to see the site, she was in a carriage. This is 1 year before her death, and she was not out doing walks on a regular basis during that. 15, 6 years before her death, but I don't know why I had 1909 in my head, but I knew she died in 1915. 1908, but just for, if you put all the time that she spent in Loma Linda in 1908, it's less than a month. And she was not out, she wasn't a walker then. Her health was already at that point. How old was she when they died? 80, okay, that's what threw me. All right, I was thinking she was 81. That's what they're saying. She was 80 years old in 1908. So you got that you can grapple with too. In the Ellen White estate, when you read their position, they're not really arguing against Will Ross. They're saying just, you know, he doesn't get recorded until 1936 or something, 30 years after the fact, and memories get fuzzy. And the other argument is that the two people that were on the Railroad Depot with Ross was Sister McKennifer and Brother Robinson, and neither one of them ever recorded this. You know, I know in the testimony they asked Brother Robinson, but neither one of them ever put it to writing. So I'm going to throw that in the mix too, is that for Brother Ross to say he frequently took walks with her during that time period when she really wasn't living there and she was not mobile enough. The only thing she was doing is walking from here to there at that time in her life. She wasn't taking long walks. Is a logical argument to think about whether we should be using that Railroad Depot vision and placing that much weight on it. Okay.
Brother Jeff, just for your information, Sister White had a diary entry. She had 2 diary entries, and she was pretty consistent in every day of what she did. So if you really want to follow up, there's information out on the unpublished stuff that you could actually figure it out what she did. So I'm saying is that if you really want to be accurate, that would be the way to go about it.
You want to be accurate? I'm willing to, even if it's accurate or inaccurate, I'm willing to take it on the testimony about that the word denominated is used. But I'm just making sure we understand that it isn't a black and white argument. But if you want to dig into her diary and see what she did on those days she was in Loma Linda.
They're scattered, but you can definitely look around the area where you're talking about.
Okay, one other, switching gears now. Brother Conrad pointed out to me after the presentation on on Daniel 11 and the king of the south, and in connection with the controversy that people are opposing it, that there are secondary lines going on in that history. And I've understood that it wasn't new light for me when he was explaining it. I followed it and I agree with him. And I want to put that into the mix here to start with before I conclude on what the material I had on Daniel 11, and we move out of that subject. So I'm on page 1 of your notes. What I'm going to try to show here today, and this will be all review for us. I would think everyone here is familiar with it, is that from the midnight cry to the Sunday law, this is the image of the beast test in the United States. And then the image of the beast test goes to the world. And the image of the beast test ends at the Sunday law. Okay, in the United States, this is the USA. And the image of the beast test in the world ends at the universal Sunday law. We've known this we've taught this for a long time. This history here is typifying this history. What goes on in the United States is repeated in the world. Okay, so I want to put that in the record and remind us of that before I make my point. So, Brother Tayon, will you read the first quote, and then Clayton, and we'll go across and we'll just walk through these quotes one paragraph at a time.
The image to the beast represents that form of apostate Protestantism which will be developed when the Protestant churches shall seek the aid of the civil power for the enforcement of their dogmas. The mark of the beast still remains to be defined. Okay,
so what we're talking about here is two entities that we would typically call church and state. Okay? The Protestants are seeking the civil power. That's church and state. You want to read Revelation 13:11, Clayton?
And I behold, beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spoke like a dragon.
He spake as a dragon. The United States is going to speak as a dragon right here. The characteristics of the United States is it's speaking, and I think you can go all the way back to the Articles of Confederation as the first place the United States spoke. But it speaks all the way through its history. But here it's speaking as a dragon passing to Sunday law. But it's going to be developing the dragon spirit leading up to this. But here is where it's marked in prophecy. And it's important for the point I'm going to make that we define what the speaking is.
The speaking of the nation is the action of its legislative and judicial authority.
Okay, so it's the state that's going to speak. Right? The civil power, whether it's in the United States is going to speak or whether it's the United Nations that's going to speak, it's the civil power that is the entity that speaks. Brother Graham?
So what is the image to the beast, and how is it to be formed? The image is made by the 2-horned beast, and is an image to the beast. It is also called an image of the beast. Then to learn what the image is like and how it is to be formed, we must study the characteristics of the beast itself, the papacy. When the early church became corrupted by departing from the simplicity of the gospel and accepting heathen rites and customs, she lost the spirit and power of God. And in order to control the consciences of the people, she sought the support of secular power. The result was the papacy, a church that controlled the power of the state and employed it to further her own ends, especially for the punishment of heresy. In order for the United States to form an image of the beast, the religious power must so control the civil government that the authority of the state will also be employed by the church to accomplish her own ends.
And one thing I want you to see, just so you can, and you know this, none of this I think is new for any of us in here. But just in the this short amount of words that we've read, when we're talking about the state, she calls it the civil power. She calls it the secular power. She calls it the state, obviously. And probably some other expression that I'm passing over. It's them that have the authority. And that authority then, therefore, would be civil authority. And the reason I'm saying that is when I get done with setting this up, I'm going to try to show that, let us understand that what's going on here in the United States is repeated here in the world, and that Daniel 11, as we've been looking at it, is showing a progression of events that takes place in the world, but we have every reason to believe that those progression of events are also going to be typifying what's going on in the United States, because we know the image of the beast test is typifying the image of the beast test in the world. So if we have a prophetic line that's showing a sequence of events that's taking place in the world, and that's what we're looking at Daniel 11, there's every reason to think that the ebb and flow of those events are going to be taking place in here, not in the world, but in the United States. And we have understood for many years that when this image of the beast test is going on in the United States, that a Seventh-day Adventist in the United States, that's the external, but internally, you and I are either forming an image of the beast in ourselves or an image of Christ in ourselves. Okay, so now what I'm saying is there's three lines that you can look at. You have the world, the USA, and personal. Is that a right word? Is a better word? Individual. Individual.
What about church?
Yeah, one at a time.
No, world, USA, church, and then individual.
Pardon me?
Worldwide, USA-wise, church-wise, and an individual.
Yep, one at a time.
Okay.
Okay, but that's also valid too. If you go into one place I go to make her point, I was going to make it now, but we can throw it in the mix, is that Abram's covenant prophecy is identifying that when Moses leads God's people out of Egypt, probation is closing for God's people. At the same time, it's closing for the nation that they've been captive in. So you have, in that story, you have the close of probation for Egypt as a nation, typifying the close of probation for the United States at the end of the world. But you also have a close of probation going on for the Hebrews that were in Egypt. So this history here would also have the same pattern. There you go, going on in the church, the Adventist church. There's a lot of ways to show that. So you can find a line of prophecy, and that's what we're doing. This is the easiest one for me. You can find a line of prophecy that is primarily addressing the formation of the image of the beast in the United States, and once you're settled, okay, I get that, you should be able to plug those step-by-step events into the image of the beast test in the world, but then plug them into your individual experience and know that the Seventh-day Adventist Church, the church, I'll leave it at that, is going through those events as well. Now the reason that I'm trying to put this in place is because I'm not threatened personally that there's brethren in the United Kingdom that have been looking at a different line perhaps and have concluded that Revelation 11, Daniel 11:11 at the level they're looking at isn't the United States, okay? But that's not what's going on over there. They may have a different line they're looking at, and it's the only one they're capable of seeing, and so they're going to argue about it, and they're unwilling to acknowledge that the line we're looking at is talking about the United States as the King of the North. But I'll try to explain as we go on. Who's next? Tanya?
The enforcement of Sunday keeping on the part of Protestant churches is an enforcement of the worship of the papacy, of the beast. Those who, understanding the claims of the fourth commandment, choose to observe the false instead of the true Sabbath are thereby paying homage to that power by which alone it is commanded. But in the very act of enforcing a religious duty by secular power, the churches would themselves form an image to the beast. Hence, the enforcement of Sunday keeping in the United States would be an enforcement of the worship of the beast and his image.
Okay, so what we've taught, and it's correct what we've taught, but now there's more to it now that we have fractals, but I'm going to keep it at the basic level to make my point. And a long time ago, we never had a starting point of the midnight cry. We just knew that there was going to be an image of the beast test where Sunday laws began to take place in the United States, but they weren't the Sunday law that fulfilled the definition of the Sunday law, which forces you to observe Sunday and persecutes you for keeping Sabbath. When that Sunday law arrives here, the United States will have spoke as a dragon, and that is the climax or the capstone of the image of the beast test. Okay, this is talking about a progressive development of several things, but a progressive development of Sunday legislation that's about to begin in the United States. And when it reaches here, the image of the beast test is over, and the image of the beast test in the world has begun. And so I'm just putting this quote I'm using to show that there is a definite conclusion to the image of the beast test.
I have a question. In the earlier part that we read, it says that the state will also be employed by the church. The authority of the state will also be employed by the church to accomplish their own ends. And here below it says that the churches would themselves form an image to the beast. Am I understanding wrong? Does it sound like the church will be manipulated by the church, and then they will, the church will manipulate the state, and it'll make the image of the beast, and then the church will take that authority and implement it in the church, but then also the church itself will form an image to the beast. Is there two formation? Am I misunderstanding?
I don't know what you understand, but I'm just trying to understand your question. I'm not sure I understand your question, but I'll give you an answer that may be your question. As this testing process, there's a statement where Sister White says something like, if we would not receive the mark of the beast, we must have the conviction now to say no. Okay, so we have to settle in to Sabbath personally, individually, into Sabbath observance for ourselves before the Sunday law arrives. So there's a testing process that goes on, but so too it would be for the church. Okay, it's a progressive thing. So the individual is going to be forming the image of the beast. The Adventist Church will be forming the image of the beast. The United States will, and so will the world. When it reaches the point down here that the Protestant churches of the United States have taken control of the government, you know they've taken control of the civil power when it is demonstrated by the fact that they can enforce the Sunday law. But back here, from what we're beginning to see, or not really beginning to see, what we've seen with midnight and the fractals, the Adventist Church will have already been leading out in the persecution of those in Adventism that are faithful by reaching out to the state as the Jews did when they reached out to the Roman authorities to come at midnight and take Christ. So the Adventist Church, or the Jews of Christ's day and age, have already formed an image of the beast relationship before the cross. Okay, so that's the trick you have to see, is that there's more than one wheel within a wheel going on here. And you got to make a distinction on which line that you're dealing with. And because you're dealing with one line at a time does not mean necessarily that you're denying the other lines. Okay. Did that answer your question? Okay, brother.
The Lord has shown me clearly that the image of the beast will be formed before probation.
Okay, stop there. We know that probation closes at the Sunday law. Okay, so she's saying the image of the beast is formed this side of the Sunday law. Okay, that's part of the argument that it's a progressive thing that happens in advance of the Sunday law?
For it is to be the great test for the people of God by which their eternal destiny will be decided. Your position is such a jumble of inconsistencies that but few will be deceived.
Okay, no, you can keep reading in a second, but the second phrase in there that he read, or most Seventh-day Adventists don't acknowledge, and we always acknowledge it, so I want to put it in place. This shows us that our great test is not the Sunday law. Amen. Our test is something that comes before the close of probation. Okay, and this is where our eternal destiny will be decided, in the image of the beast test. Most Seventh-day Adventists, if they think anything about the close of probation, they think it's the universal Sunday law. Some of them think, well, it's a Sunday law in the United States. But most of them do not understand that the test by which our eternal destiny is decided is in here. And she's going to elaborate more on that in the next paragraph. Go ahead.
In Revelation 13, the subject is plainly presented. This is the test that the people of God must have before they are sealed.
Okay. When are we sealed, my brother? The sealing is a process, but prophetically, the Sunday law is where the seal is marked prophetically. So there's a test before you're sealed by which your eternal destiny will be decided. But without a doubt, if you don't have a character prepared for the seal of God in advance of the Sunday law, you're going to get the mark of the beast. But this is where it's marked prophetically. Therefore, when she says, this is the test that the people of God must have before they're sealed, she's nailing down that this image of the beast test is the test that we have to grapple with. Yes?
I wonder about the priest. Will there be an image of the beast before midnight cry? Because for the priest...
Yeah, now you're getting into fractals. Yes. Yes, all of this is going to back up. That's what I was just saying. When you get to midnight, you got Christ arrested at midnight, and the Seventh-day Adventist Church, the Jews, have reached out to the civil power, the Romans, to come arrest Christ at midnight. Okay? So we're not dealing with the fractals here, but the simple answer is yes. Sister Kathy, read Revelation 13 verses 14 and 15 out of your Bible. It's not in the notes. Uh-oh. Oh, good.
And deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast, which had the wound by a sword, and did live. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak, and cause that as many would not worship the image of the beast should be killed.
For years, when I was dealing with Revelation 13, I would read verse 11 through verse 15, and then I would ask the audience, how many images of the beast are there in verse 13 through 15? And 90% of the time, if people answered, they'll say one. Because you can clearly see in verse 14 and 15 that the image of the beast is being erected. And once I got them elicited the answer one, I'd say no, there's two. But it's not plainly marked there. But you know by the logic we've just walked through that in verse 11 the United States speaks as a dragon, that's the Sunday law, and therefore there has to be an image of the beast based upon these other passages that we read in the United States that leads to this Sunday law. So there's, line upon line, there's two images of the beast in chapter 13. And this one that Sister Kathy just read is the one that the United States goes to the world and says, you need to set up an image of the beast. And the image of the beast, a simple definition is, it's the combination of church and state, with the church in control of the relationship. That's what we just read. When the Protestant churches have the authority or the power to enforce the civil government to pass a Sunday law, that's the image of the beast. So the image of the beast is a combination of church and state with the church in control of the relationship. In this history, the United States is going to go to the world and command them to set up an image of the beast. Command them to set up a structure that consists of church and state, with the papacy in control of that relationship. The state is going to be the United Nations. And verse 15, what Sister Kathy read, what is that image going to do? It's going to speak. It's going to speak in this history. So it's the same history. And so there's a passage in the Spirit of Prophecy that people struggle, they use that passage to fight this, what we're sharing here, because Sister White speaks about that I forget exactly how she says it, but she's really emphasizing that it is a democratic government that accomplishes this work of setting up the image of the beast. And you can clearly see that she's talking about the United States. It's a government where the people vote this system in. So they argue that because she's saying that this image of the beast in the world cannot be that, because it's not being accomplished by a group of citizenry that is passing these laws. But first off, line upon line tells you there's an image of the beast test in the world, image of the beast test here. And this, although I'm not trying to argue that it's a democracy, the structure of the United Nations isn't a democracy, but they're going to vote this in themselves and push it forward. So if you want to stumble over that, go ahead, but the line upon line tells you that this history in the United States is typifying this history here. Next quote, Brother Rick.
As America, the land of religious liberty, shall unite with the papacy in enforcing the conscience and compelling men to honor the false Sabbath, the people of every country on the globe will be led to follow her example.
Okay, so here's the USA. Image of the beast test leads to the Sunday law. And she says every country on the globe is going to follow that example. This is that example in the world. Leading to the universal. And there's another quote there, goes along with that, Brother Bud.
Foreign nations will follow the example of the United States. Though she leads out, yet the same crisis will come out upon our people in all parts of the world.
Okay, now what I'm trying to do here today is acknowledge that even what we're teaching about Daniel 11:11 being some kind of conflict with the United States and Russia, that there is justification for seeing other lines that aren't dealing with that level. They're not dealing with the worldwide. And I'm putting in place this argument that is an old argument that we've understood for a long time, that the dynamics of the image of the beast in the United States that leads to the Sunday law is repeated in the world, image of the beast, universal Sunday law, so that we can see that if we have a history, prophetic history, that's describing the activities in the world that lead to the Sunday law in the world, then we should be able to take those point-by-point activities and bring them back in here and see how they were typified in this history. And if we're going to go really into fractals, then you should be able to take that and put it right into the binding off as well. Okay? But we're not doing that. That's not the purpose of this. Brother Graham, you want to read Revelation 11:8, and Brother William, Ezekiel 29:2-3. We're going to turn the corner here for another point now.
And their dead bodies shall lie in the street of the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified.
well established here that every two-horned power in the scriptures is typifying the last two-horned power of the United States. So, but really, France is one of the premier illustrations of this. And we know that the United States has two horns. And what are those two horns? Republicanism. And so I'm saying republicanism is the state. That's republicanism. And Protestantism is the church. But France typifies us. So I'm going to argue that the two horns of France, that Egypt is the state and Sodom is the church. Okay, so if this is correct, and it is, then we get to add the characteristics of France into our understanding of the two horns of the United States. So, Brother William, Ezekiel 29.
Son of man, set thy face against Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and prophesy against him and against all Egypt. Speak and say, Thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I am against thee, Pharaoh, king of Egypt, the great dragon that lieth in the midst of his rivers, which hath said, My river is mine own, and I have made for myself.
Okay, here, Egypt is the dragon. But we know the United States is going to speak as a dragon. And how is the United States going to speak as a dragon, through the state or through the church? Through the state. It's an action of its legislative and judicial authorities.
Just a text to prove that it's only one, but to prove that Sodom is the church. Isaiah 1:9, except the Lord of hosts had left unto us a very small remnant, we should have been as Sodom, and we should have been as Gomorrah.
And that's Isaiah 1:9?
Yes.
Okay. I wasn't going to take time. I was going to just use the logic that you got two choices. If the one is the state, the other one has to be the church, but that fits in there very nice. So Sodom is the church. Egypt is the dragon. You got church state there in those two horns in France. Same thing you have in the two horns of the United States. Who's next? Sister Carol?
And he had two horns like a lamb. The lamb-like horns indicate youth, innocence, and gentleness, fitly representing the character of the United States when presented to the prophet as coming up in 1798. Among the Christian exiles who first fled to America and sought an asylum from royal oppression and priestly intolerance were many who determined to establish a government upon the broad foundation of civil and religious liberty. Their views found place in the Declaration of Independence, which sets forth the great truth that all men are created equal and endowed with the inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the Constitution guarantees to the people the right of self-government, providing that representatives elected by the popular vote shall enact and administer the laws. Freedom of religious faith was also granted, every man being permitted to worship God according to the dictates of his conscience. Republicanism and Protestantism became the fundamental principles of the nation. These principles are the secret of its power and prosperity.
Okay, so this is Protestantism, Republicanism. We have these two horns, whether it's in the United States or France, but they have certain important characteristics. And so you'll see where I'm going with this, and we're not going to go much further, but when the Protestants rejected Miller's message in the Millerite history, what did the Protestants say that what did the Millerites say the Protestant churches became? The daughters of Babylon. Okay? So the Protestant churches in that history are becoming the representative of Babylon. And who's Babylon typically in terms of the king of the north and the king of the south? So there is a sense here that the Protestant churches are the king of the north. They're his representatives, right? What defines the king of the south? Egypt. Okay, so there is a way to relate to these two horns as the king of the north and the king of the south. I don't know that in this particular controversy that has started, I don't know, because we got a battle between the king of the north and the king of the south in Revelation or Daniel 11:11, and we're identifying it as Russia and the United States. But at this level, if there's a struggle between the church and the state that goes on in the United States, is there a struggle that goes on in the United States between church and state? Okay, so but that struggle, you can see the logic for saying, okay, it's a struggle between the king of the north and the king of the south in the United States. You can see that logic. I think I might keep it when I was teaching it at Sodom and Egypt. Just, you can acknowledge that it can be understood as the daughters of Babylon, king of the north, and Egypt, the king of the south. But it may add a little bit of confusion if you're initially teaching someone to put it at the king of the north, king of the south level, but it is there. So Brother Teon goes, he makes a point, and you can't hold him to anything that I'm going to say about what he's understanding. But I don't have a problem with what he's understanding, but I haven't taken it to the level that he's taken it to, so I might not be reflecting everything that he understands about this. But I know enough of it to at least put some of the arguments in place. Right here, in 1863, you've got all kinds of things happening. This is the one thing you can show by history is the United States now is divided into two parts. Okay, this is the dead center of the Civil War. It's been divided south and north at this point in history. And this is the end of the 25-20 that began back in Isaiah 7 with a civil war between the north and the south. And it's ending here with the civil war between the north and the south. So at the external level, if you want to say it that, you've got indications that when this 25-20 that began back with the division or the civil war between Judah and Israel, when it comes to a conclusion here in the United States, that sure enough, the United States is divided into two parts. And you'll see in your notes that in 1834 and 1856 is the beginning of both the Democrat and Republican Party. Okay? So they're going through history, but the clear distinction of these two political entities, we could put in 1863. You got the conclusion of the 25-20 there. You got, and I'm not dealing with how this impacts the Seventh-day Adventist Church now. I'm dealing with the United States at this point. So you got Democrats and Republicans. And we should all understand this. I mean, if you didn't know, we all understand that. I'm not going to pretend like we don't. The Democratic Party has morphed into, at minimum, socialism. But you got Bernie Sanders now that he's an outright communist, and he's getting big play in the Democratic Party. Okay. And the king of the South in the scriptures is communism. Okay? So you can make a case that now down here in our history, leading up to the Sunday Law, that there's going to be a struggle between the king of the South, the Democrats, and the Republicans. And who are the Republicans? What is their connection? Religion. Apostate Protestantism is the one that's putting them on the throne. So you can make the connection that it's the daughters of Babylon that are giving them the direction about what they're going to do. So you got the king of the north and the king of the south back here. Clearly, the division, you can start here. It's heading all the way through history till it gets down to this time period. So in the internal dynamics of the United States, if you use this prophetic logic, you can see a struggle between Democrats and Republicans, between the two entities, the political entities in the United States. And it's political entities because what they're seeking to do one way or another is take control of the government. They're wanting to take control of the government to enforce a Sunday law, whether they know it or not. So that's the struggle that's going on, okay? Any comments? Okay.
You go ahead. All right. That's Isaiah 19:2 and 3, because Isaiah 19:2.
Read it.
It says
Isaiah 19 verses 2 and 3.
It says, and I will set the Egyptians against the Egyptians, and we already stated that Egypt is the state, which is the dragon, so that is an internal battle within the United States. And they shall fight, and they shall fight, and they shall fight everyone against his brother, and everyone against his neighbor, city against city, and kingdom against kingdom. And verse 3 states that after they fight with themselves, they go towards charmers and wizards, which is going after a church to help them, and now the church would be over the state. That's how I'm seeing it in my eyes there. But
okay, I don't intend to get to that level, but I understand that point. So when the Sunday law comes to you, I forgot, you had your hand up, go ahead.
I wanted to point out the idea that I read part of it yesterday, A.T. Jones with the Republic. When Rome comes into the history, he comes under the form of the Republic, and what the Republic promises is religious of liberty and religious of freedom for people to choose their own government. When Napoleon comes into the thing, he also does the same thing. They run for the Republic. They want to bring a Republic, freedom. United States, the same thing. It's a republic. That's what they want to do. They're fighting, claiming to want to bring freedom to the people. But in the very end, that freedom is taken away and being conquered.
It turns into a dictatorship.
Yeah, so you can kind of see the pattern happening step by step from Rome all the way down to France, and then all the way to the United States. But more closely, you can see between the North and the South.
Brother Connor?
I was just going to say, it's interesting as you look at the global level, as you said, the king of the north, the king of the south, America and Russia, the king of the south. Then you come in the United States, you have the same thing, Democrats and Republicans, king of the north and the king of the south. But when you apply it to the individual level, it's the spirit of Christ and the spirit of Satan. So you have that same battle contending for the supremacy even inside.
So what do you have when you apply it to the church?
It's the same thing. The doctrine, it will be the doctrines of Christ or the doctrines of the dragon, which is the king of the south and the king of the north.
Yeah, that's correct. But for me, there's a more classic illustration of the church.
Conservatives and
you're one step closer, but it's the Pharisees and the Sadducees.
Yeah.
Okay, in the church.
I don't understand though on how that line applies to anything. That's what it doesn't fit with all this other stuff. What does that mean?
Okay, all that means is that I'll have to go through with you Isaiah 7, because in Isaiah 7 verse 14 there is a 20 time prophecies. The prophecy begins in 642 BC, and it says 742, and it says within 65 years, which takes you to 677, within and the word within is in there, will Israel, the northern kingdom, be broken. And 19 years later, the northern kingdom is carried into captivity, and that's 723. And that begins a 25-20 time prophecy in 723 that ends in 1798. That's the northern kingdom of Israel. But at the end of the 65-year prophecy, this is Isaiah 7:14.
7:8.
All right, what am I saying wrong?
7:8.
7:8. I don't know why I'm saying 7:14. At the end of the 65 years, you get to 677, and that's where the 25-20 begins for Judah, the southern kingdom. And it comes to a conclusion down here in 1844. So this is what they call a chiasm, because once you have the beginning here of this 25-20, this is the beginning, this is the end, but the prophecy begins back here. Okay, so you're going to have another 19 years extending onto this, which brings you to 1863. So,
That wasn't my question,
no. Okay, what's your question?
The 1834 and 1856 relation. I don't get.
Okay, all right. Okay, but here, this country's divided, civil war, and all the characteristics of that history correspond to the history of 742. So you're now going to have the Democratic Republican Party come into this history, and they're going to struggle with each other in this divided state all the way through. And the characteristics that each of them have are either the characteristics of the daughters of Babylon, or the characteristics of the dragon, the characteristics of an apostate church, or the characteristics of state. They're struggling all the way, I don't know if struggling is the right word, but they're struggling politically all the way through this history till they get to our time period. And now the climax of all this is going to take place. So you're marking the beginnings of the political struggle that we're at the very end of. The last president is here. Brother Conrad, Brother Teon.
Yeah, and to highlight what you're saying, we were reading in class, I believe it was Wagner. Wagner highlighted that struggle in 1887 before 1888. He said within 1887, the Socialist Party, they were at war with those of the religious faction, and they were both contending for the unions, to take control of the union. Who was going to control the union? Because whoever controlled the union would basically control the elements that were going to come in. And this was
So Wagner, in 1887, is marking for Seventh-day Adventists that there's a political struggle going on in the United States between Republicanism and Republicans and the Democrats, okay? But they can be expressed in various ways. But the point there is he's making this comment in 1887, which is the year before 1888. And 1888 is when the Lord tried to pour out the Holy Spirit on His people. It's taken you to, in our day and age, 9/11. Just before 9/11, you can see a decided political argument going on between the Republicans and the Democrats in this country. One's carrying the mind of the papacy, and one's carrying the mind of atheism.
I still don't get the numbers though. Where's 1834 and 56?
This is the beginning of the Democratic Party. They were established in...
I get that.
Okay.
But where does it apply to anything? That I get where the 1863 does. I don't get where the 1834.
All I'm doing, here's what I'm. The only reason I have that up there is if 1863 is where the United States is divided and this begins. If I was going to argue that these two political parties are a prophetic character at the end of the world, and I'm marking the division here in 1863, and I found out afterwards that the Democratic Party started in 1878, it wouldn't work. They both have to be there at this time.
Don't apply to nothing. They're just the start dates proving that it's before 1863.
Yeah, because see, there's a lot of people, a lot of Americans are pretty much brain dead to American history, all right? And they don't realize there's been many political parties in the history of the United States. Many, okay? But it's these two parties that are the ones that are fulfilling prophetic history. So you got to put them in place, and in order to make your argument that this is the scattering, the division point, you got to show that both these parties were in existence. They either had to come into existence in that year or be there before. That's all I was saying. And I wasn't trying to get to this level. You didn't finish, I'm sorry.
No, sorry, I was actually going to say, I can see how all of this plays into our prophetic message. Because when we have to give a warning, we're going to have a good understanding of all these histories, of how these parties, and just like A.T. Jones when he went before Congress, he had a good knowledge of American development and the things that were put in place and the certain political parties and what the roles they play and what they did. So I can see how this fits into our prophetic message. Now we're going to have a good knowledge of American history so that we can give a good reasoning behind why we should not have a Sunday law within the United States.
Okay, that's all worthy study what we're talking about. We should wrap our mind around it. But what I want to remind us of is all I'm trying to do is acknowledge how someone could listen to us lay down Daniel 11:11 and say the king of the south is Russia and the king of the north is the United States, but they've understood that the king of the south and the king of the north is actually describing the dynamics within the United States, and they're going to stumble over it because they're not willing to see both lines. All right? And so I'm, in my argument that the king of the south is Russia in Daniel 11:11, I just want to be clear. I'm not arguing against those other circles, those other wheels, or those other lines, however you want to express it. They're there, but when we're doing Daniel 11:11, we're taking it at the world level and laying it down. And as the brother in Spain said, who the glorious land is was an argument for those last 6 verses. It's like one of the first arguments that's popped up since this light opened up. It makes sense. So, pardon me? Tayon?
Oh, so what Kennard and Clayton was saying just now, because Kennard was saying they were dealing with the Democrats and Republicans in 1887 with Wagner. Well, before class this morning, I was doing my personal devotions, and it was in 1887 while they was dealing with that they was addressing the omega of apostasy.
Oh, really?
Yes, and I found some quotes.
They were addressing the omega before the alpha apostasy?
Yeah, they said in order to see it, you have to see the alpha, and the omega will be, they're going to try to change the principles. So they were addressing it by principles. But however, what Jeff was going over with 1834 and 1856, those were the formalization. These governments was God, before he gives an establishment, there's always a little play of light that comes before something's established. The United States never had a Republican government until around the time period of 1863. Their first Republican president was Abraham Lincoln. And that's 65 years after the United States rose up in 1798. And the prophecy says Ephraim, and Ephraim could be God's people, or the glorious land, Jerusalem, shall be broken. And in 1863, the United States was broken into 2 governments officially, Democrats and Republicans.
Two political philosophies.
Yeah, Democrats and Republicans, and they would war against each other. And it's not a coincidence that the Advent movement becomes a part of the government.
Now you're getting another wheel in there.
Yeah.
But it's there. The 1863, we understand more about Adventism in 1863 currently than we do the politics of the United States, but it's there.
So at another level, we're showing the external history of the prophetic fulfillment, the state. And then we also have the church. So there are 2 different lines, one external, one internal, of how they line up beautifully together.
There's 4.
Well, no, but I'm just saying right here in the United States, that's what we're doing.
Okay. So I've acknowledged that. Next, page 3, another point. I'm trying to bind up some thoughts. I think I'll work on this board because this is a totally different thought. There's something I put in the mix in one of the presentations that I never finalized. So whose turn to read? Go ahead.
Many falter and fall because of the indulgence of perverse temper. Alexander and Caesar found it much easier to subdue a kingdom than to rule their own spirits. After conquering nations, the world's so-called great men fell. One of them through the indulgence of appetite, a victim of intemperance, the other through presumption and mad ambition.
Now I want you to follow this logic if you would, because I got two hooks that I want to put together in this. Sister White here is using Alexander to typify Caesar, okay? And Alexander is the person that establishes the first world empire in the scriptures, okay? But Caesar is marking, Julius Caesar is marking the final complete conclusion of that world empire, but he's also marking the beginning of a new world order, the Roman Empire. So you've got a few things going on here with Alexander and Caesar, but Sister White here gives us the prophetic license to identify Alexander as the first and Julius Caesar as the last, but both of them are marking the beginning of a new world order, okay? Alexander the Great takes the world. By the time Julius Caesar comes along, he eliminates any remnants of Alexander's Greek kingdom, and it marks the beginning, the third obstacle, of the Roman Empire. So you've got a couple things going on there. The Roman Empire, for however long it lasts, you got a new empire in history. You gave a curious look.
Well, I was just thinking the last empire didn't go until 31 BC, and that was Augustus.
That was what?
Augustus.
Caesar.
Yeah, when they're going to rule supremely. But I'm talking about you got.
They had control over
Yeah, you got some transition time. I'm not arguing that. But this is the arrival of the Roman Empire.
The chart shows us the beginning of pagan Rome being used in 150 BC. Both of the charts shows us that.
Okay. Prophetically, there's some details that we could get into. Prophetically, these guys are typifying the Greek and the Roman Empire. How's that? And do you acknowledge that Alexander the Great is the symbol of the Greek world empire?
Yes.
Okay. Sister White has just used Alexander to typify Julius Caesar. So is it okay if I use Julius Caesar as the symbol of the arrival of the New World Order that we call the Roman Empire, even though I know that there's some historical things that have to take place? That's what I'm saying here, okay? So the other hook there that I want to see is this grade, okay? Alexander the Great, that's what history calls him. Antiochus the Great, that's what history calls him. Cyrus the Great, that's what history calls him. And Bush the Great is what I call him, but they line up in the prophetic line, so I have some justification for doing that. The only reason I'm reaching out to the word great is to give me just some secondary justification for lining these symbols up, okay? So you see a quote from Prophets and Kings where Sister White calls Cyrus the Great. Now, Medo-Persia, 2 kings. The 2 kings that are marked are Darius and Cyrus. And I'm saying it's Cyrus the Great, so he's going to line up with Alexander the Great. Okay? And I'm not saying that Cyrus has a world empire like Alexander the Great, but I'm saying that Cyrus is part of 3 decrees, Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes. And the characteristic about Cyrus's decree is it goes to all the world. Okay, this is where you have the worldwide tied into Cyrus. Just like Alexander, worldwide, and Julius Caesar, worldwide. You following the logic? Okay, then in the 2 sons of Seleucus Cyrenius, okay, Seleucus Cyrenius, and then the second son, Antiochus the Great. The Great. He's tying in here with Cyrus the Great and Alexander the Great. He's here. Don't necessarily have any that I know of. There probably is one, a worldwide marker for him, but I don't need one because he's lining up with 5 other persons and 4 of them have worldwide. Do you know something about Antiochus?
Yeah, there was 2 sons. That's Daniel 11:10, and
Yep.
in verse 10 it says, "But his sons," it was plural. By the time you get to the end of that verse, it's singular. One of the sons get killed and the other son takes over the whole government.
He's the greater.
Yeah.
He's the greater. You got a great there.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so that's tying it in. And these guys are typifying what event? Reagan and Bush. And you remember my argument, and I know it may be weak for some, but when we have these 4 presidents that follow Bush the first, and one of those presidents is Bush the second, then in terms of father and son, this is Bush the greater. And I walk through grandfather, great-grandfather, grandson. So he can even tie him in Bush the Great, Antiochus the Great, Cyrus the Great, Alexander the Great, but Alexander the Great typifies Julius Caesar. And what does Caesar mean? Ruler of the world. Okay, the great. So they're all the great. But the point is what is it that we associate? Don't answer. I used to use this so much that all I have is the front page now. I don't have the magazine anymore. But this is George Bush the Greater announcing a new world order. Okay? This is from December 11th, 1989. Okay, so, of course, this December 11th. That's when this magazine's published. And I grabbed this one here. Everyone remember this? This is from February 1997. This is Signs of Times, Seventh-day Adventist Church. John Paul's Global Vision. It's totally outside the scope of this study, but I hadn't looked at this in a long time. Do you know what this is? This is the Seventh-day Adventist Church praising John Paul II. And the guy that was the editor of this magazine at this time, he happened to come to a ministry at this time, right after this was printed, and we hit him up. Why are you praising the Pope of Rome in the Signs of the Time magazine? And he says, oh, this isn't praise. There's nothing praise about that. We're just trying to meet them where we are, where we can win them. And I didn't have time to look, but I have the next Signs of the Time issue after this one. And in the letters to the editors, there's a letter in there from a Catholic woman saying, I thank you for the wonderful article you had on Pope John Paul. So there's no way around it. In that history, the Adventist Church is expecting, going the wrong direction. And from this history, this is 1988. Reagan never expected that he was going to be there to the wall, with the wall coming down in Berlin. So just going through that, I kind of got us off track perhaps. Bush announces a new world order. So what I'm saying is all these guys, one of the things that is part of their prophetic characteristics is that it has something to do with the new world order. You follow me? So that leads into the argument, if it is an argument, of 1945. Okay, 45 being the key element of 1945, because we're now in the history of the 45th president. So if you're going to take 1945 and bring it to our history using the prophetic license that everyone in Adventism would probably say is fanaticism, to pull 45 out of 1945 and plug it down here in this history, if you're going to do that, because that's what I'm going to do, is that in August 6th, 1945, and August 9th, 1945, you have 2 atomic bombs that are dropped. The first one is on Hiroshima, which means broad island. Hiroshima. The next one is Nagasaki, which means long cape, on the 9th. And in this history, the United Nations begins. Okay, so what I'm saying is you got New World Order, New World Order, New World Order, and perhaps the most significant event in terms of this New World Order was the formation of the United Nations in 1945, and in this history you have these 2 bombs, and they take place on the 6th and the 9th, and we know that the 6th hour is midnight, and the 9th hour, midnight cry, then New World Order. I mentioned that in the last presentation, but I didn't give you any kind of structured logic about why I was mentioning it. So I wanted to at least let you see why I did mention it.
Those dates are providential, the days, the 6th and the 9th, because they wanted to drop them on different days, but the weather wouldn't allow. The weather cleared up perfectly on those days, and they could do it. So, you know, that's clearly providential.
They had different dates selected, but they were forced. That's like the story of the Spanish Armada. But anyway, so I have underneath there, who is next to read? Sister Ange, did you read? Read Genesis 16:12. Now, remember, the reason that I was putting that in place is I'm saying that this may very well line up with the Battle of Raphia. And this with the Battle of Panium. Battle. And it may be proxy war, but if this is valid, it may be something more. Yes, Brother Tyler.
What are you suggesting with that, is my question. Are you suggesting, because I know you suggested that before the Sunday law there could be a limited nuclear war. But are you suggesting that there would be a nuclear war starting there and then again at both points?
I'm saying that I'm open for correction, but here's the dilemma that's raised by this. Is if we're using 1989, can 1989 typify midnight? Okay. And midnight, that before 1989 there was a 10-year proxy war between Russia and the USA carried out in Afghanistan, where Islam is in the mix. Okay, it's the one doing the fighting. And right now, we have a proxy war where Islam, Syria, and Syria is where Raphia is located, okay? And it's once again between the USA and Russia. So the argument is where this is just opening up this passage in Daniel 11. There's one argument that says, is midnight just going to be the climax of a Cold War? Because 1989 was the climax of a Cold War, but it was preceded by a proxy war between these same two powers, and the proxy war was accomplished, the active agents was Islam. And now we see in Syria, in world history, a proxy war going on again. So is this simply the conclusion, the climax of this proxy war that is the battle that has been typified by the Battle of Raphia? Is it some kind of conclusion of a Cold War that lifts Russia up as the United States was lifted up in the end of this proxy war? Because it's clear that in this proxy war, in this Battle of Raphia, that it is the king of the south that prevails over the king of the north. So what I'm saying is, if we have license to take the formation of the United Nations in 1945 and bring the history that leads to it of the 6th and the 9th into this, then the 6th would be the Battle of Raphia, the 9th, the Battle of Panium, and this would be Hiroshima, this would be Nagasaki, and here would be your New World Order that has been typified by the formation of the United Nations. All I'm saying is I'm open for correction about whether this is going to be a hot war, that this battle has nuclear weapons involved with it, or if it's the climax of the Cold War as it was here. Okay, so I'm uncertain. I'm not, if you have some strong arguments one way or another, I don't mind hearing them. But this Battle of Raphia in history, it was a big time slaughter. The King of the South prevailed. And then this one was an even bigger slaughter when the King of the North prevailed. It was a bloodbath. But if it's typifying a Cold War, so be it. Okay, some hands are Brother Vadim, then Brother Conrad. Did you have your hand up earlier?
No, I was going to read.
Well, read it. I want to put this thought in, and then we'll go to your questions.
Genesis 16:12, and he will be a wild man, his hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him, and he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren.
We have taught correctly that the element that brings the New World Order, brings every man's hand together in the world together, is Islam. So as we're dealing with this about the King of the South and the King of the North and the Battle of Raphaim and the Battle of Panium, I'm not trying to say that Islam isn't in there. I know better. That's why you got Islam here and Islam here. Islam is another agent in there. So I'm not trying to deny a foundational truth. I'm saying there's lots of wheels going on here. Brother Vadim, then Brother Kanar.
One thing that we know is that in the Cold War we have the nuclear weapon involved. So
what do you mean by that?
We're speaking that at Raphia, which is Hiroshima, we have a nuclear weapon. But
are you sure that that's a valid application?
Now, I wanted just to say that in both of these histories we have nuclear weapons involved. So maybe something we have to see something in these things.
Yeah, it seems to prophetically have the characteristics to fit in there. That's what lends me to believe that it's probably a hot war. Brother Kanar?
I just wanted to bring this into the element. I never knew this until Brother Will mentioned this to me, that in 1451, when they hired the cannon maker, that he was hired because of money issues and you know, and he wanted to get revenge basically on the ones that wouldn't pay him.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm just about to bring this.
Yeah, just yesterday, Trump fired all the nuclear representatives of the nuke plant that was under the Obama administration, and he's about to bring in a whole bunch of new people into that factor to deal with that sector. So I just thought that was kind of interesting as I think back to 1451. With someone being angry over money issues, and now you come down to the end of the world, is it possible that someone could be angry that they've been working somewhere for 15 years and now they're out of a job?
Yeah, but, correct me if I'm wrong, because I understand that history too, but I'll put just a little bit of more clarity in it. This famous cannon makers hired by Eastern Rome to come to Constantinople and build a cannon for them. They're under the escalating threat of Islam. But when they get to Constantinople, the Eastern Roman Empire is so bankrupt that they can't pay him. They haven't got the money to do the work or pay him for his work. And after a period of time, he gives up on them and he goes to Islam. He goes to Muhammad. And Muhammad finances him, and Muhammad ends up building that cannon. Okay, so I get your point about Trump, but there's also that there was a lot of bankrupt Russian scientists after the Cold War that may very well be looking for money, and so it could go either way. You know, you always hear about the suitcase bombs that the Russians had. Where are those suitcase bombs? But it seems more pertinent now if Bush just, or not Bush, Trump just sent the nuclear scientists down the road. But anyway, the guy that built that bomb, he was a European back in that history of 1451. He built not the bomb, the cannon. He was not a Muslim. He was a European. Okay, so, but the Muslims used it.
Just wanted to say, you was wondering when the 19 could come into play. Between the Battle of Raphia and Panium, that was 19 years apart.
Okay.
Yeah.
It depends on which historian. I've read the historians and they're saying that the actual date is vague, and you can get 200, you can get 198.
In 217, yeah. I mean,
but because you got 19, it seems to fit, you're going to go with 198.
Yeah.
I like it. I like it when things fit.
When I was talking here, I remember reading from Sister White that in her diary, actually the two diaries, she entered a vision that she had in 1906, August 23rd, 1906. And in each entry, she actually quoted different scriptures. But she's talking about the fact that she was experienced similar to 9/11, but it's a little bit different in the way she explains it. And in one of the entries, she quotes Isaiah 30:8-15, which is talking about the 1863 chart. And in the other one, she quotes Revelation 18. She quotes Revelation 19, Revelation 21. She quotes all these. And I was just thinking, this is a doubling that it's entered twice, with more information the second time. I was just wondering if that's playing a role with what might happen in the future for us.
Don't know.
Has anybody read that?
Perhaps, but I don't know.
I will send it out. I don't have everybody's mail, but I will send it out for you to look at it.
Brother Nathan, would you have a closing prayer?
Loving Father in heaven, we give you thanks for this hour of worship, Lord. We give you thanks for being here amongst us and for shedding light on these truths, Lord. We pray that we may diligently dig them out as for hidden gems, and that these truths may abide in our hearts and in our minds, that we may be edified by your word and transformed by your Holy Spirit. Please go with us as we go throughout this day about our daily labors, and give us blessings as we know that you are always ready to do. This is what we pray and ask for in Jesus' name. Amen.